Okay, welcome back to the Perspectives in Rural Education podcast. This is episode 7, and today we have with us Russ Tomblin, who is the principal at Moulton Middle School in Shelbyville. So, welcome to the podcast, and go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, thanks for having me. Like you said, my name is Russ Tomblin. I'm the principal at Moulton Middle School in Shelbyville. It's a 4th through 8th grade building. I originally grew up in Villa Grove, and so spent my K-12 career there. And after graduating from Villa Grove, made my way to Eastern Illinois, and that's where I obtained my bachelor's, master's, and specialist. Thank you, EIU. I've definitely supported you as best as I can financially, and then ended up starting teaching here in Shelbyville at this building back in 2004.
Okay, so you've always been at Shelbyville.
Yeah, so it's been really interesting listening to the podcast, and everyone's kind of had a different story, and so that's been kind of fun. Is that for me, my story is that I actually started in Shelbyville in 2004 and taught 4th grade in this building for 8 years, and then now I'm in my 10th year in the principal's role. So I don't have that variety of experience right now. So I feel like there's things that you sometimes miss when you don't do that, but there are also some perks too.
Definitely. And it says a lot about the school district. If you stayed, it must be a good place.
Yeah, I do think an awful lot of it. It actually does remind me a lot of home. Villa Grove, even though it's a little bit of a smaller town, just a lot of similarities. And I think that's kind of the joy of rural education is, there's that connection and relationship in a lot of our communities.
Yes, so true. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. Why did you decide to go into education? Was that always the plan?
Well, so when 2nd grade, when I thought I wanted to be a professional wrestler like Hulk Hogan, and I thought I was going to be like 6'4", 250, when I started to realize that wasn't happening, honestly, I actually wanted to go into teaching when I was in 5th grade. Had some amazing educators that just really had an impact on my life, especially as someone that grew up with my background. So it was around probably even high school is when I even started having the thoughts that maybe I wanted to be an administrator because of, my experiences with the educators in Villa Grove. So like for me growing up, it was actually, I grew up in a house that, my dad wasn't in the picture. And then my mom left when I was in 6th grade. And so, those are some pretty formative times. And man, you have some amazing educators that hold you to high standard, but still love and care about you and made you feel that way. It looking back, like I just felt like I was I was just a normal kid. And so that was really, really special. And so then even when I was in high school, looking back, the reason I started thinking about administration for me was because, Danny Powell was the elementary middle school principal. And I just saw the impact he had, not just on staff, but on students too. I mean, he had a huge impact on me as well. So that was my why. I mean, just that safe space that, let you know what you could count on. And, hopefully I'm creating that here too. Probably not as solid as those people at Villa Grove, the Danny Powells and the Bill Granzes. And I mean, the list goes on and on and on.
That's awesome. I like how you mentioned how like the teachers and educators like in your district growing up, how they held you to a high standard, but they also like had that caring connection with them. Because I think like you can have both, and I feel like not a lot of people realize that, where you don't have to be just soft and all caring, but you can also hold your students to a high standard. So that's cool that you talked about that. And so back in high school, you were already considering administration. I'm curious why.
Looking back, I'm starting to question that too. Why? There's some days that are different than others. But like I said, you could walk through the halls and Mr. Powell would know every single student's name, have a conversation with them, know something about them. And then you'd see him interact with the staff and you could just feel this genuine connection with them, that they were colleagues, they were coworkers, but there was a caringness to each other. Yeah. So it really made me think, as a teacher, I get the opportunity to impact 20 kids at a time, each year, 25, whatever the number is. And then, as a coach, maybe another 15 kids each year. So you're really looking at maybe 35 per year. I got to see this guy, 60, 70 kids per grade from kindergarten through 8th grade, plus, 20, 30 staff members. Yeah. And I just thought, man, how amazing is that? What an awesome opportunity to have an impact, and seeing someone do it really well. Mm-hmm. You think, oh, that would be fun. It's harder than it looked, but he made it look easy. But it was just that opportunity. And that's what excited me, was that idea.
That's awesome. And so in your first year of teaching, what was it like? Like, what was one thing that you learned in your first year that surprised you?
I had no idea how exhausting that first year would be. You think you're in decent shape, you play basketball, you have time at the rec or whatever, all that good stuff. The mentally exhausting questions, and they weren't even always hard questions. It was just, there's so many questions that you get asked throughout the course of the day. And so that was really, really overwhelming. It mentally drains you. And then, you go home and you're crashing at 3:30 and you're like, why am I so tired? I didn't physically do anything. And then the other thing that I think was really challenging as a first year teacher is, you're trying to do the absolute best you can to support your students and support your parents. But for me, one of the things that was hard is I wasn't a parent. I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. It was, you're trying to know what to do, and you kind of knew what you were doing educationally. But then if you're talking with a parent and they're asking you about, well, what's your advice? Because we're seeing this at home, you're still trying to figure that out. At that time, I'm 22, the kid's 10. I mean, there's not this huge gap there. So that was a little overwhelming as well.
Yeah, I could see that. I didn't even think about that, but that's so true. That's so interesting. And so what grade did you teach your first year?
So my first year, I taught 4th grade here at Moulton. So I had, I don't remember, maybe 22, 23, 9 and 10-year-olds, where you walk in. And I've heard some of the other people on here say, yeah, you walk in and, hey, here's your classroom and here's what you need to do. And, let us know if you have any questions. And honestly, sometimes that is kind of what happens with, a new teacher. Here's your curriculum, but as administrators, we're not experts in every curriculum. Mm-hmm. Like that's just completely unrealistic to think, if I could have taught 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade, but 4th grade would have been something different to me. So it is, it's definitely overwhelming. You get provided those materials, and then it's just kind of time to dive in.
Yeah. And so were you planning on going into middle school? Like, is middle school where you wanted to be?
Not at all. No, it was just 100% the Shelbyville. Dr. Sheila Greenwood was the principal at Moulton at the time. She had been a teacher at Villa Grove. And so just that comfort level of knowing the person that was going to be leading, someone that you had, seen on a day-to-day basis, and you really trusted, and you knew they were a great educator that cares about kids. So when seeing that there was an opening in her building, even though it was a unique setup, 4th and 5th grade here is actually your typical elementary. So, you teach everything, it's not specialized. 6th, 7th, 8th is when you see that middle school concept. So it was just teaching 4th grade. The unique thing being, though, instead of 4th graders being kind of the older kids in the building, they're the absolute youngest. So that was never a plan, never a thought. But getting here, it was great, because then I had the opportunity to see kids from the ages of 9 to 14. And it is kind of fun, because there is a big shift in personalities, as they hit junior high.
Yeah. It's always funny to me to hear, I think Alan Zuber, I think he was saying he loved middle school, he loved that age group of kids. And then I hear some people who are like, I will never be in a middle school. And so it's just funny how the preference for different age groups, and I totally understand how people's personalities match and better in different places too. And so when the principal job opens up, what was the transition like, or how did that come about?
Well, so that was definitely an interesting situation for me. I mean, I love Shelbyville. I was super excited, but there were a couple opportunities here from an administrative standpoint that didn't work out for me, and that's actually something that was really important and good for me to grow and learn that it was not my time, and I wasn't probably ready. And looking back on my first year and that transition, it was accurate that I still had some life lessons to learn, some education lessons to learn. And so the first year I was just super blessed. I know, Bill Fritcher on an earlier episode was talking about when he was teaching in Shelbyville. And, he was also talking about some of the benefits of having a veteran staff. I had a really veteran staff that knew what they were doing. They just, basically embraced and said, okay, you're going to make your mistakes, and we'll help you out and carry you along the way, is probably what they were thinking. But the transition was hard in the regard that you just don't know what every day is going to hold. That was a really, really big change. Whereas you walk into your classroom, you're able to shut the door, and for the most part, you're controlling kind of the organization, and this is what we're going to do. This is the order. These are the things we need to accomplish. And, that first year, there was a lot of learning. You can walk in planning on accomplishing, 3 things, but you might not get one thing done, and it's 4 o'clock all of a sudden. So that was a big learning moment for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure. That would be such an interesting adjustment. Like, do people prep you? Do you know what you're getting into? Or is it kind of like you start doing it and you figure it out?
Yeah, a lot of it's just, learning on the fly. I mean, like Easter does a fantastic job of preparing you for a lot of the structural things that you need to do. Mm-hmm. And when I became a principal, they had a new leaders organization, which was phenomenal. It was first year principals, and we got to meet with veteran principals, and that really helped you kind of sometimes think through some of the decision making or the process that might work for your building. But it's that day-to-day thing, like the first time you have a parent that's upset about something, or a student discipline issue, or a staff member, the thing that probably shocked me the most that they can't prepare you for, but is when your staff goes through losses. That hurts, and it's hard. You don't know what to do. There's nothing you can say. I mean, you grow closer to these, people that you care about, and they become your family, and then they go through a loss, and you're feeling it too. And you've got to be respectful too of their time, and they might not be ready for you to share that, or they might not want anyone to know what they're going through, and that's okay. But it weighs on you, and that's absolutely the hardest thing in this role, is just knowing some of the things that your staff and your students are going through. Whereas as a teacher, I only knew about those 20 kids. And, in this building, there's 420 or 30 kids and 35 staff members. So it just increases the likelihood that, rough things are going to happen, and, you're going to have to do what you can to help people.
Right. I would love to hear you talk more about what it's like to kind of lead your staff as the principal, and what things do you keep in mind when you're talking to your staff members, or things like that, especially because when you kind of made it sound like when you started as a principal, the teachers were veterans, and so some of them are older than you. And what is that dynamic like?
If you're lucky, you have veterans that are okay with adapting and adjusting. They maybe even went through a few administrators, so they're going to support you. The thing that probably stands out to me the most is to remember what it was like to be the teacher. Mm-hmm. When it comes to your time. I really don't enjoy meetings. Like, that's not my favorite thing. As a teacher, I was like, oh boy, we're going to have a faculty meeting, what's this going to be about? So, knowing that, walking in and saying, okay, guys, these are the things we have to accomplish. I'm going to try not to waste your time. And I'm sure there are days that they're walking in like, oh boy, what are we having this meeting for? But, some of it you have to do. But I really think that was probably the most important thing for me, is, valuing their time like I would want my time valued. And I think as teachers too, that's important. If you can even remotely remember what it's like to be a student, it will make your life, I think, a lot more successful with your students if you think, okay, I'm not going to give you this busy work because I don't like busy work. So why would I give you that? Like, let's make these meaningful meetings, conversations, everything with a purpose as best as possible. So
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I feel like I've asked that question a lot and I always get different answers, but I've been waiting for someone to say this because like that's what I would imagine is that when you make that transition to um to principal or to an administrator at all and you're leading staff, like to keep in mind what it was like to be the teacher. And then I didn't even think about how that even trickles down into like as the teacher remembering what it was like to be a student. And it's like it just makes sense that that would be the most effective way, just considering the perspectives of others. And so let's see, why did you choose to, I know you grew up in probably a rural school district, and so why have you chosen to stay in rural education?
Honestly, for me, it's all about the relationships. Kind of like what I touched on, what it was like growing up in Villa Grove. You always felt like I had a great relationship with the teachers because they showed you they cared. Like you knew they cared about you and they cared about every student, whether you got yourself in trouble or not. They wanted the best for you, and so. That was why for me, Shelbyville feels so much like home is because it feels so much like it was when I was growing up. But, for me, the rural education is just the relationships. That doesn't mean that you can't have that in an urban or suburban, setting. It's just, when I say walking through the halls and knowing every student's name, I can't imagine walking through the doors every day and not knowing your students' names. That would be hard for me. I feel like that would have a negative impact on my attitude towards my job because it's so important to me. So the rural setting is where I know I can be the most successful in establishing and maintaining those relationships. Not to mention, and this is something that we don't talk a lot about in education, but the value of your relationships with other school districts. I've really, really enjoyed getting to know people in, all these other districts around us. I mean, in Shelbyville, we're surrounded by all kinds of wonderful school districts that are doing so many different things. There's so many amazing teachers and administrators. And so it's easy to pick up the phone and call someone, call an Andy Johnson or a Bill Fritch or call any of the guys around. Some of these people we've taught together or, they've been a teacher here, Ross Forlines at Oak Hall Valley. I mean, like the names just keep rolling and you can have those relationships with those people and they can help you and you can help them. So it's not just relationships with your students and not just with your staff, but your colleagues around, even though we might be 30 miles apart, we're a phone call away. And it's just kind of special to me.
Yeah, that is so interesting. I've never thought about that, but I can definitely see that. Especially in this area. Like I think even having like Andy Johnson on the podcast and he's referencing Bill Fritcher and you're doing the same with them. What did you know that like ahead of time, or is that something like that they reached out to you and you've kind of like maintained that relationship since then? Like I would love to hear you just explain that more. Like what does that look like to have that relationship?
Well, and what's so really unique about it is I had absolutely no idea that's how that plays out. Like I just imagined, wherever you teach, everyone that you teach with, and that's who you spend a majority of, the rest of your life for 35 years getting to know. But people move for different reasons, whether it's just, they're ready for a change or, they're, getting married or, a change in, opportunities, whatever the case may be, it kind of actually expands your tree a little bit. There are more branches so that people in different locations. And so it's really neat where, maybe someone you worked with and you get to know them and some of their coworkers. When I first started teaching, I actually lived in Sullivan and my best friend taught in Sullivan. So I got to know some of the educators over there. And then some of those educators became administrators in other districts. So then, now all of a sudden I'm getting to know people in those districts. Or you go to a PLC and for with the regional office of education, and you get a chance to be around some of those people, or, with some of the guys that you just mentioned, getting to know them at the EIU Grow Your Own initiative and sitting down and talking about what can we do. That's probably how I got to know those guys a lot more. And, the best thing I could do, which is hard for me, is to sit and listen, but I respected those guys. And, there are so many wonderful educators, and it's a variety of different ways that it kind of happens. Just by being present and, putting yourself out there sometimes at meetings, and other times just getting to know colleagues in your building. So.
Right. That's awesome. Can you give us a glimpse into the Shelbyville School District? Like, what are some special things about it, and why have you chosen to stay?
Oh, wow. Magical things in Shelbyville. I mean, the first thing is you get to wear purple. I mean, clearly, as the Rams, a little purple and white. I mean, that's pretty magical. But we just, I think, have a pretty good emphasis on the social emotional learning side. This is not something new to us. This is not just an initiative. It's been something that we've really had an emphasis on for quite a while. Probably predating, me moving into the administration. It was already kind of something that was thought about, but then, as, I moved into my role, talking across all three buildings, our preschool, actually 4 buildings kind of with our preschool, but preschool, Main Street, which is our elementary, and the high school, looking at, okay, how do we help kids succeed? And it's not just academics. How do we help them with work ethic? How do we help them, develop their grit, empathy for others? I think that's probably one of the things that made Shelbyville stand out to me, was that, there was an understanding of, it's not just presenting the academic piece, but there is that social piece. There's the emotional piece. There's, the way people feel, and that's for staff as well. But, seeing that emphasis really let me know that's where I want to be, because culture is probably the thing that I put the largest emphasis on. And that isn't necessarily right or wrong, but I think if you have a good, strong culture where people work together and care about each other and trust each other, then the best things are going to happen. And I think that's part of that social emotional piece. And so to me, that's the thing that stands out the most about Shelbyville, because it's been something that's been important to the district for quite a few years.
That's really cool to hear too, because it's definitely become a hot topic in recent years. And so it's really cool to hear that it's been implemented there for a while now. What vision or hope do you have for, it could be your career in education, it could be for like the field of education in general, or for your school district, but what kind of vision or hope do you have for the future?
For me, honestly, what I really hope is that, when I retire, I'll have some of the same stories that, you can hear on the podcast where, a kid comes up and says, you made a difference. I would love to say that, at the end of my career, I've had the impact that the educators in Villa Grove had on me, and that hopefully someone will feel the same way that I felt, about those people, like Mr. Danny Powell and those educators. Really for our building and our district, my hope is that, we're going to continue to do our best to make kids successful. And my definition of success isn't really the amount of money you make or what degree you earn or any of that. It's, are you going to be someone that's going to care about others and do the best that you can every day? At Main Street Elementary, as much as I, hate to give Ryan Scott, our elementary principal, a shout out, be nice and work hard is his mantra, and we adapt that, when they come to the middle school and talk about being respectful, accountable, motivated, and safe. So be Rams. But I think that be nice and work hard is a pretty simple thing. That's what I'd love for us to be able to say, is that we're helping kids know how to do those very, very basic things. Mm-hmm. Do your best and treat others the way you want to be treated. If we can do that, we'll be really, really successful.
Yeah, definitely. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given pertaining to education, and maybe something that you still think about or implement daily?
I absolutely know exactly where to go with this. I remember at a wedding, Mr. Powell pulls me off to the side when I was, getting ready to go into, I think it was maybe my second year of teaching. And he said, remember this, and always remember this. Sometimes the kids that are the hardest to love are the ones that need it the most. And the ones that are the easiest to love are the ones that need it the least. And man, that, just hearing that, I still kind of get chills, and that's not even, I can hear it though. I can hear him saying that. I can feel the emotion, and what he really truly believed. He 100% believed that, and he's 100% right. So to me, as an educator, there are days that it might be harder than others, but if every educator remembered that, when you're having a tough time connecting with a student, I think that's probably the best advice I've ever been given. And I'd relay that to anyone, and hopefully people will remind me of that when I need to hear it too.
Mm-hmm. That's so good. And that's so true. And I'm sure that being in education, as the years go by, there's different kids that are hard to love each year. But when you understand, I'm in grad school right now for speech pathology, and something that one of my professors said one time was that kids' behavior is communicating something. And that has changed the way I see kids interact and behave so much, because I'm like, what are they trying to communicate? They're not trying to be bad all the time. Sometimes maybe, but not all the time. Usually it's they're trying to communicate something. And so that's such good advice. I love that.
The thing is remembering to grow. I mean, because, that it would be easy not to remember that, and it'd be easy to just assume things, but things do change. And, we do know that COVID is having an impact on our students, and has had an impact on our students and our staff and our communities. It's impacted everyone in so many different ways. And we don't know, just because it impacted me one way doesn't mean it impacts you the same way. So, you've got to be able to adjust and learn. And I think that's something that, with student behavior, you do have to remember. I'm still learning. There are days that I probably do better at handling it than others. And, every day I hope to do my best, but hopefully every day I'm better than I was the day before.
Yeah, definitely. As we wrap up, do you have one student story, maybe an impactful story, or just a story that you will always remember?
So I know you asked this question, and I've thought about it quite a bit. And it's kind of a more personal on just advice for myself. And it's something I need to always remember. And I'd encourage anyone, as you're going through education, whether as an administrator or a teacher. But I remember there was a particularly difficult situation when I was in one of my first years, and unfortunately DCFS was involved, and I just didn't have any idea what this student was going through. Kind of like what we were talking about, I had absolutely no clue. And I just remember as they're just very bluntly sharing what their experience was the night before. And I'm sitting there thinking about, I can't imagine that ever happening to me or my loved ones. And so walking out of that meeting, I remember I walked in the door later on that evening, and my oldest daughter, who's 11 now, was I think probably 4. And she really loved watching the movie Tangled. And I walked in the door, and I think it was Monday Night Football was maybe on. It had been a really, really long day, maybe some supervision. And she said, "Dad, do you want to watch Tangled?" And all I wanted to do was really plop down in the recliner and veg out. But because of that story, I said, I absolutely do. So, the student story, unfortunately, it wasn't that uplifting story, but it is the story that always pops in my mind, that I need to be better at home. And I also need to remember what kids are going through. But that's something that's always probably going to be etched into my brain, honestly, is what he was going through. And I just didn't know.
Yeah, that's so good. Especially because like when I ask that question, I think people assume that it's just about school, but I think almost everybody that's answered it, it's so much more. It's about like that kid's life, you know, and you can't something that Andy Johnson talked about. He was telling the story about a similar situation where he had no idea what was going on in this kid's life at home, and the reality is you can't separate the two. Like once you understand what a child's home life is like, it makes so much sense for, you know, the way that they're doing in school, and you just can't separate the two. So I love that. All right. Well, thank you so much for being a part of this. I like have enjoyed doing this so much because it's so fun to hear the different things that people say. And it was cool to hear you when we started off the podcast, you were talking about kind of why you went into education and just that memory of your own principal in elementary school, going through the hallway and greeting all the kids and stuff. And I can hear how similar you are to him in that way, and just the way that you care for the kids. And like I feel like every one of your answers somehow related back to like it's all about the students, it's all about the kids and them being successful. And so it's really awesome to hear the way that that's impacted you in your career today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Truly an honor. I mean, you've had some amazing people on here. I thank you for doing it. I think this is, an opportunity for all of us to learn. I've enjoyed listening because, you can even learn about some of your colleagues or even pick up some things from each of them. So thank you so much for having me. It was truly a pleasure, and look forward to being a listener.